absolutely crucial that going further, there are more and more like longitudinal experiments also looking at the impacts long-term and after effects, not only what are the performance and how good people can become while using the device, but also what happens when they take it off.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. It's been a while. I've been busy moving houses, so I'm sorry about the intermittency of my podcasts. I'll be trying to put out a couple over the holiday season and then spending some time with my family and then really hitting it on the new year. In this episode, I'm starting on a new area of interest. I want to talk about the emerging field of human enhancement. Technology is now allowing us to modify our bodies in ways that people only dreamed of in the past. We've discussed genetic enhancements in previous episodes, but in this thread, I want to dig into the state of the art and the ethics of human alterations, additions, and modifications. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do like what you're hearing, I would love if you could press like on your podcast app, leave a review. It really helps to get exposure from our listeners if you share with me what you feel about the podcast. If you want to give me some feedback, come join me on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Giulia Dominijanni is a Ph.D. student at the Neuro-X-Institute and School of Engineering of the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, and a Mary Skłodowska-Curie Neutouch International Training Network alumna. Her research focuses on developing bidirectional human-machine interfaces for augmenting physical abilities, particularly through control strategies and sensory feedback approaches for extra robotic limbs aimed at human augmentation. Her doctoral studies included a visiting period at University College London and the University of Cambridge, where she studied the impact of a feet-controlled extra thumb on body representation and biological lower limbs abilities. She holds a Master of Science in Bionics Engineering from the University of Pisa and Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, and a bachelor's degree in Clinical Engineering from La Sapienza University of Rome. Giulia, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting me and for inviting me.
So I found out about you through a paper you'd published on adding a third robotic arm to people and having them learn how to control it. This is really an interesting piece of research. But before we get into the research, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself? Like, how did you get interested in robotics engineering?
Yeah, so I started to get interested into this topic during my bachelor. I had a general interest in medicine and science and engineering, and I started my bachelor, and then during my bachelor I started getting more and more keen, starting first with prosthetics, and I did a master working more on prosthetics with Professor Michera, which is my current supervisor for the PhD. And then it was thanks to him who proposed me to start working on this exciting project at the Translational Neuroengineering Lab that I started my PhD. I moved from Pisa to Geneva at Campus Biotech, where our EPFL laboratory is based. And I started to get excited in this very new field, which actually holds many promises, but being so new also required a deeper understanding. So when I arrived at the lab, there was this project sort of laid out, but the cool thing for me was that it was we were also extremely free, because everything was really at the start. I started from scratch, and we're like,
Nice.
okay, where do we start from?
That's very cool. So your bio says that you're an alumna of the Marie Curie Neutouch International Training Network. Could you tell me what that is?
Yeah, that's an international training network for Ph.D. students. So we have a general big project, and each of the students works on very different sub-projects that all connect somehow to the same, let's say, goal from different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also founded part of my PhD and part of the study. Yeah.
And that's robotics as well?
So this is also robotics. So all of the network was based on prosthetic, robotics, and systems and technologies for these applications. Yeah.
Very cool. So let's get right into it. The paper you published is really extraordinary, I think. So you had a third robotic arm that you just attached to people, like you strapped it on, and then it said they could control it with their diaphragm and their eyes. Could you maybe describe it in a little more detail than I've been able to get across here?
Yeah, of course. So we started by trying and understand how people could control this extra arm. And to get to the reason why we decided to use diaphragm modulation, so how we can move the control of the diaphragm and the gaze. Let's take a step back. So the idea is that when we want to provide augmentation, we also should make sure that we are not just rerouting a function. So just, for instance, exchanging your ability of moving one arm to move an extra robotic arm. This wouldn't be a full, complete augmentation. Mm-hmm. We are just like rerouting your functions. And this is especially important when it comes to biological limbs, so the arms and the legs. And so we decided to try and use a different kind of human-machine interface, a different kind of control strategy that was inherently not involving the biological limbs, to see if this kind of strategy could help. Then we decided to go for diaphragm modulation and gaze because, we know that what the task that is defined for the extra arm is a reaching task, and we know that is innate, the gazing of the target of our reaching actions. So we sort of leverage on that on our human-machine interface. And we use diaphragm modulation because we also know that there are studies looking at the agency related also to intrinsic functions, but also, for instance, from respiratory functions, cardiac functions, and so on and so forth. But also because it's a very simple signal to record, but also extremely easy to modulate. Like everyone knows how to control their diaphragm.
Yeah. Okay. So can you maybe describe a little bit more the purpose of this experiment? Why were you adding arms to people that they control with their diaphragms? What's the goal, the end goal of this research? So
the end goal of the research was pretty much on twofold. Let's say one was very related to what we just discussed. So understanding whether is it possible to control without hindering your biological functions. And then, if this is possible, can people learn to control, and can it be used for the task that was designed? And this is what we showed. So, and to do this and do all of this testing, actually, we transitioned from an implementation in a neuro-robotic platform in virtual reality that was indeed integrating an extra arm in virtual reality with a bimanual exoskeleton that was tracking and providing force feedback to your natural arms so that you have a fully immersive simulation. And this would give us the possibility to test different things in virtual reality before moving to the test with a physical robot. And then once all the tests in VR, we saw that we were successful. So we moved to the physical robot. We did a simplified version of the human-machine interface. And we saw that participants could actually, both naive participants, so people that just came in the lab for the first time, they were in the robot and they started controlling it, but also participants that did several days of training before in virtual reality, they were both able to control this extra robotic arm for reaching tasks. That's the task that we defined in this case.
So how good did they get with controlling this? How precise could they?
So
move this?
they get fairly precise. So we had different tasks. When I talk about reaching tasks, we have unimanual and bimanual reaching tasks. We go up to participants that get to 100% success rate. On average, we are somewhere between 60, 80% success rate, depending on the different kind of tasks. We do tasks also where participants do not have visual feedback. In that case, the success rate goes very low. This is a task that we did in virtual reality. But in general, we see that participants start off pretty good and can also improve throughout different days. And they retain the learning, meaning that we call them back in the lab weeks or months after the training, and they can still perform the task pretty well.
Wow. So people can just add extra robotic limbs and learn to control them intuitively with muscles they rarely use. Is that the result that this shows?
That's also something. It's not really muscle that they rarely use. Like, so we use our diaphragm for everything, for instance, and we use our eyes for everything. It's just that we are able to do, in this case, depending on the control and how the control is designed, we're able to do both things. But in general, this is also the take-home message for me of the research is that carefully planning your control strategy and assessing all the steps will lead you to the possibility of controlling an extra robotic arm, providing true augmentation to the user. But what you said is very interesting because actually there is another line of research that also was taken, like is part of the research at the lab. That is the use of auricular vestigial muscles for and the training of people to learn to control auricular vestigial muscles. So the vestigial muscle, for instance, the superior auricular muscle is muscles that were used like ages ago to actually control the movement of our ear. But these are called vestigial muscles because they're there, but we don't use them anymore. There are some people that know
their ears to control the robotic arms.
So there are people that know how to control their ear, people that don't, but it was shown that people can learn to control these muscles. Also, these muscles still have a representation in the motor cortex of the brain. So people can learn indeed. And it was shown also in the publication from our lab.
Wow.
I was not part of this, but it's also a line of research in the lab. And this is something that could be definitely used because this is totally independent from anything else.
So how long does this learning process take before people are getting good with using these extra prostheses?
So in our case, what we did was having participants coming to the lab for 3 consecutive days. So the improvements we have seen were on 3 consecutive days, and we are talking about a session of 1 hour per day, more or less. Then some of them came back for a 4th session after a week or after a year. And they also then went to the robotic extra arm, or there were the people that just went directly for the robotic extra arm. We do seem to see some plateau in learning already over the 3 days for some kind of task, not for others. So for instance, especially for unimanual reaching, so when you just have to reach with a single arm, so only with the third arm while maintaining the other arm in a fixed position then we see sort of a plateau that was not like completely, let's say, validated as a plateau because we only had 3 days. So, but it seems to be a plateau. While we see an improvement, a continuous improvement in learning when we talk about the bimanual reaching, so going with the extra arm and one of the two arms together. I would say that this also gives us a hint that it clearly depends on the kind of task. They can pick up pretty fast, but there is room for improvement. And how many days is going to need, or how much training in terms of hours is going to be needed, that's going to depend on the task in hand.
That's really interesting. So you can use this extra arm 3 days, 1 hour a day. You've got now, you're augmented physically, potentially. Did you try it? How did you find the experience of controlling the arm? What was it like? Did it feel like just part of your body after a little while?
Of course, I tried it because, like, can imagine that, like, developing and everything. So I've been playing, let's say, more than trying with it for a lot of time for testing and developing. I find it myself pretty easy and straightforward to control. But again, I'm also biased because I've worked on it for a very long time. But normally, also what we see is that people have more or less the same, let's say, opinion when they are not reporting cognitive loads like that are over the moon. They decrease with time. So I would say that my experience eventually can be considered just the experience of a person that actually used it for a very long time. It does. You do feel, I must say, like, you do feel ownership over the arm because it's fully under your control. So this is something that, you do feel agency over the arm because you feel that you are in control of the arm. Whether you feel that it's part of your body, I haven't been working in the virtual reality one. For me, at a certain point, yes, but it's true that our participants with that amount of hours didn't report it. Same for the robotic one, they just spent like 1 hour. Each of our participants just spent 1 hour with the robotic one. So yeah, I guess it's also something that could depend. But eventually, like, this idea of, like, is it part of me, is important. So, like, it's also all these concepts of embodiment is important, but, like, more and more we're going towards an idea that maybe what's needed to be able to control devices like extra-robotic limbs, but also prostheses or any other kind of these devices in sort of this mega broad domain is more what has been, like, defined as soft embodiment. So it's more of a sort of a functional embodiment rather than a full, more like what is called in contrast hard, where you have to check all the different texts of the definition of embodiment. So something that it feels like your body, that is feel as part of your body, that your agency over it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, was there any feedback, like, to the participants from the arm? Like, was there any touch feedback or anything like that? Or is that something you're thinking about incorporating?
So we did a few tests. So subset of participants were also provided with a tactile display when we were doing our test in the platform, so in the virtual reality exoskeleton mix platform. But we found that, surprisingly, that is so opposite to what most of the time happens with prosthesis and in prosthetics. The haptic feedback we provided did not improve performance compared to no haptic feedback. We have several hypotheses about this. It could be that the kind of task didn't really need an additional sensory feedback over the visual one, being a reaching task. It could be that different sensory modalities are needed. It could be several different things. But what we've seen is that what we have provided in that case did not improve. Contrary to what we would have expected, did not improve. And this is also, though, something that helped us then consider what to use when we moved to the physical extra arm, because as I said at first, like the virtual platform was where we were sort of like playing with the different tasks, different components and everything. So once we've seen that the haptic feedback that we were providing was not useful, we did not include that when we moved to the use of the physical arm. So our human machine interface in that case was only the one including the control. There is another interesting point that is that when we talk about the physical arm, this is also something that has been widely discussed in the field. There is an inherent feedback that people get from the physical interface between what the robotic arm or the robotic limb in general that you're wearing and your body, because it's going to be somehow a rigid interface, different level of rigidity, but it's going to be a rigid interface. So whatever happens there is going to propagate, and you're going to have a sensory feedback at the interface, and it's been hypothesized that this might be as well enough. We don't know this yet, but one interesting thing that we have seen is that participants performed. If we take participants that did their first ever session with the human machine interface, so with the control strategy, with the physical robot, and with the virtual robot, actually the people with the physical robot perform better than with the virtual robot. That could be due to the fact that they have an extra feedback due to the interface with the robot.
I mean, there are obvious applications from this research to mitigate spinal cord injuries, for example. And, this is the sort of thing that people do to actuate prostheses for paralyzed patients. But you are also, I think, or maybe mainly more interested in just enhancing people, like just giving you a third arm. It would be nice to have an extra arm for washing dishes, or for, I think, as you said in the interview, as for soldering. You want an extra arm to hold the two wires together, basically, while you're soldering. So, is that how much further do we have to go to get to a point where this is useful?
So, I think there is still some years to go, definitely. And I do believe that there are different applications, and different application will require more or less time to be considered ready. For instance, what you have suggested is absolutely true. Like, research in augmentation can also boost the assistive and restorative domain. For instance, exactly people with spinal cord injuries, stroke patients, not only extra arms, but extra finger, they could be used. But in that case, we might have less constraints on the abilities and on the rerouting of functions, for instance, or on the hijacking of pre-existing functions. But also the same could hold at the end. For me, this was, and for the research that we were carrying on in the lab, it was also very important as a general, very broad research on the impact of augmentation. But it's true that in some cases, and this we had discussed also before in more of like review work, that this also might depend on the task. If we think of augmenting the abilities of a surgeon might as well be standing and not moving, and so might be using their lower limb to control this extra arm. Is not as crucial. It might be not as crucial to have their lower limb free. But if we think of other applications, which I think also could be, they were a bit the drive of this project as well, which are sort of like high risk scenarios like search and rescue. In that case, we might want, we absolutely need that the person is completely capable in all of his functions, and we can provide an extra function. We cannot remove or reroute one of their abilities to provide an extra one. And these are situations where I believe this thing might make the difference, because being a high-risk situation, it might be the best choice having one single trained person to make and like put in security whatever scene or rescue people without the need of both like communicated with multiple person, managing multiple persons in high-risk situations.
But your motivation for this is just for soldering mainly?
My motivation mainly, I don't see myself using it in many other occasions, but this is mostly because we have a joke going on that every time also we are like at a party and you're holding like different stuff, everybody would come to me and it's like, you would really need a third arm. Like that's the ongoing joke, like all the time.
Okay. You hold your extra drink.
Exactly. But no, I would say that normally the reason why sometimes it's a bit hard to think about, but mainly depending on your job and might be mostly related to your kind of job, or your kind of activities, hobbies, whatever. But what it could be useful for is that the world is designed around us, and we were born with two arms. So there are not that many tasks that actually you're like straightforward. I need an extra arm for this. I need an extra finger for this. Most of them are collaboration tasks, something that normally is done in two, or something that is done, for instance, with a fixed helping older or something like that. But this is mostly because the world was designed around us. It could be that in the future something different is.
Folding a fitted sheet could use an extra arm.
Yeah, a very big one.
If you're folding your fitted sheets, you need that third arm there to hold it up. And
yeah.
So this is really interesting. What have you considered at all? Are there any ethical implications that you can see from this? The emergence of human enhancement technology, maybe more in general, than just this particular thing. But I want to explore on this show. What are the ethical implications of unlimited human enhancement? We have this emerging technology that's going to revolutionize what we can do. Have you thought of what the ethics of all of these things are?
Absolutely, definitely. Actually, we partially discussed this in a previous theoretical work with several researchers involved from different universities. So there is clearly the need to focus and understand what are the ethical concerns, but also the ethical aspects of these technologies, especially when we think that they will become widespread and children and minors might get exposed to this. So the main idea for me is very minorly slightly related to what we did. So like how much we are hindering your functions, and is related to this more in a way that if I am hindering your functions or I'm hijacking your functions while using it, what happens when you stop using it? If you're using it for several hours, then when you take it off, are you going to go back to where you were, to how you were, to your abilities? This then is also linked to more broadly and in general, even if is not anymore linked to, even if we design the perfect interface that is not hindering anything in general, is how is your brain going to adapt? Because at the end, you need to to control these things, you are sort of incorporating them somehow. So there must be some adjustments. There will be some adjustments in your body and in your brain to support the control of these devices. And what is important is to understand what is the impact of this, and whether the use of such devices could have after effects. So this is definitely something that is needed. It's something that I've been discussing also in my thesis, in my doctoral thesis, and is absolutely crucial that going further, there are more and more like longitudinal experiments also looking at the impacts long-term and after effects, not only what are the performance and how good people can become while using the device, but also what happens when they take it off.
Interesting. And also, I think there's also maybe the issue of accessibility. Obviously, the first, as these technologies roll out, they're going to be really relatively expensive, and there's going to be a very exclusive club that could gain access to these enhanced abilities. Is that a factor or an issue that you've thought about or discussed?
So I believe that this is not going to be that different from most of other kids. You can think of extra robotic arm that eventually are going to be like 3D printed extra arms, so they can be like fairly not that expensive. Human machine interface, there are base of sensors that are not that expensive. I think this is going to depend a lot on the applications, definitely. So I don't think this is a concern when it comes to people and to how they're going to use them, like single people, because I believe that at first, for sure, it's going to be more like of a fancy gadget or whatever. But this could be important when we go to other kind of applications like surgical, medical applications, rescue application, where then it's going to be the problem of having it state level access and the resources to fund the purchase and the use of these kind of devices. But overall, this is not going to be as different as any other technological advancement. I mean, what I mean is that I don't think that is anything intrinsic in the device itself or in the technology itself compared to other things.
All right. So as someone who is interested in human enhancement and is studying this for a PhD, you're obviously into this field of human enhancement. Are there other technologies out there that interest you, that you see as really cool, cutting edge human enhancement stuff that you'd be hoping to get access to?
Well, I've been, as you also mentioned at the beginning, I've been working for almost 1 year, and then in presence, and then we are still collaborating with the plasticity lab from the University of Cambridge, where I had the chance to work on the third thumb. In this case, we're talking about a toe-controlled extra thumb. So is very different because it's a finger and is not an arm. We're talking about toe control, which is inherently linked to lower limbs, for instance. But that was extremely exciting because thanks to the expertise of the lab, we also had the chance to study brain changes before related to the use of the thumb. Everything is still like sort of in process, so I cannot talk too much about this. But cool. That was extremely exciting. Then there are other technologies. I think what would be extremely cool. So there are also there is a lot of research in the US as well. Thinking of like Professor Assad at MIT. They have super cool amazing robots, and I think even though they're doing a lot more recently on the interfaces and everything, but I think they are still, they're like mechanical engineers. So I absolutely understand that. And I very much admire their job. I think I would love to be able to combine what like the amazing technology they have and try to use our approach to find a way to control the technologies also they have. That would be very exciting.
That's cool. So you talk about brain changes, and I want to maybe just touch on that a little bit because that's interesting. So when you're controlling these extra things, there are changes, measurable changes in the brain and how it interacts with certain areas. Can you maybe describe a little bit how that works or what happens? Like the area for those muscles grow?
So there is very briefly, like there was like what I've been working on more recently is actually also based on previous studies in the lab that I visited. And what they have found is that the representation, so the way you represent the fingers of your hand in the somatosensory primary area actually shrinks after training with this extra robotic thumb, which is the third thumb designed by Claude. So basically what they did, they had this extra thumb, they've been controlling the thumb and training on it, and they were scanned pre and post, and we see a shrinkage in the representation. So the representation of the fingers become more similar, and this could be thought as being due to the fact that we are sort of like somehow making space for the representation of this extra thumb as well. This is something.
So, and that's also the ethical concern that you brought up, right?
Yes, I was about to say it's also interesting because also the lab, the plasticity lab, is absolutely into understanding the ethical aspects. They also actually then tested participants afterwards, and this was not a permanent change.
But this must be going on all the time in brains as we adapt to changes in our physiology. I mean, this must be like a natural process, right? We're always adapting to what we use or what we practice more with. People, if you focus on something, I assume that the representation of that will grow and others will shrink. So it's amazing how you learn about the plasticity of the brain and how it can, what are the limits to that? Do we know if there are limits to that?
Well, the brain is actually not as plastic as we think, and as most like the broad like research is actually like the field and the community talks about. Actually interesting, like yesterday it was one thing that is often said about plasticity is how like after amputation you get a full remapping of everything, like everything changes. Just yesterday it was published on bioRxiv, a work from the lab in which like pre-post amputation, the plasticity lab, pre-post amputation, 6 months, like nothing changed. It was a gigantic study. Nothing changes. Actually, the brain is extremely stable, but there are some areas that adapts. And these are not necessarily, for instance, the primary areas, which are those that are in charge of the direct execution, for instance, of a movement, but might be higher other areas that are more in charge of the organization of the movement, of the collaboration of body parts. And this, yes, they can modify, they can account for the use of different tools, or for the use of or for the integration of an extra body part. But I believe that in this case is very important because it's something that somehow, for instance, in the case of the extra thumb, so of the third thumb, how you use this is different than how you would use a device. And in general, also how you use an extra arm is different than how you use a tool. If you think like of a tennis racket, in that case, you have a affordances. So you're actually holding the tool and you're doing things with the tool. In this case, there is an extra limb that you are controlling to interact with the environment and with your own body. So it's very important to understand how all of this is accommodated.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And, you know, I feel like things are very plastic in your mind, like, and that your body can, or your mind can adapt to different things. And, you know, my experience, like, you know, when you're driving your car, if you get used to driving the car, you kind of know where the edges of the car are, and they become like in your brain, you know, when you're backing up.
Absolutely. We are extremely good. We are extremely good at learning. But when I say that the body is not extremely plastic, what I talk about is like body representation. So there is a representation of our body in our brain, and that's extremely stable. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and so on and so forth. That is your head. It's everything, that your mouth is there, and so on and so forth. Your body representation is extremely stable. But it's true that we are extremely good at learning, at motor learning, at learning in general, and practice-driven learning. So it's renowned. Like practice is something that is gonna make you better and better on what you do. But somehow we should understand also if the learning of this kind of device is just like a motor learning. Like imagine you're learning like a sequence of movement. So this is just motor learning, or it's a more general, more cognitive learning of how to operate these kind of devices rather than just how to move, or how to move your diaphragm, or how to move your arms, or how you move your toes to control them.
That's very cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to discuss your research with us. That's really an interesting topic that you've got there, and I'm hoping that you can make bionic limbs for everybody soon. Looking forward to getting my extra limb. So, for taking the time to chat with me, I'd love to send you a Rational View T-shirt like this.
Oh, thank you very much. And it was really lovely to talk with you. It was a very, very, very nice, very, very nice chat. Thank you for hosting me.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.